Hello and welcome to Smash Writing. And today, the beat goes on. One more trip down with Frank Martin and Transporter 2. This is a movie again. I saw it in 2005 when it came out, and then I proceeded to see this movie 50 times that year. This was a big watch from teenage Justin, much like the first one was too. But much like the first one, I haven't seen this movie in about a decade. And I can only remember bits and pieces, and watching back, I didn't really get blast of nostalgia, but we'll get into that later. Until then, though, let's dive in and talk about it, shall we? This movie opens up with Frank back in a parking garage. He's about to leave whenever a group tries to carjack him. That doesn't go well, as one might expect. He won't give up the ignition code to his car, so they try to beat it out of him and end up flat on their asses pretty quickly. Except for the one girl. He lets her run off. She apologizes and runs off. But he gets back in the car and he goes and he picks up a little kid named Jack. And it turns out he is now doing a favor for their normal chauffeur while he gets better or does something. And he's chauffeuring Jack around for this family. And they bonded pretty well together. They're playing a riddle game that the kid is very excited to be playing. I'm not going to tell you the riddle. You'll have to watch the movie and find out yourself. But when Frank gets him home, though, he sees that the mom, Aubrey, and the dad, Jefferson, are arguing. So he purposely drives past them to put Jack to the parents or to Jack's back, and Jack doesn't have to see them arguing. Which goes over really well with Audrey. And they have a little bit of a moment, and they talk, and they plan out that Frank is going to take Jack to the doctor's the next day so Aubrey can plan the surprise party. While that's all happening, we see that they're being watched through a surveillance camera. And Frank leaves, and we go off and we meet up with the bad guys of this movie. Just briefly enough to know that they're doing something with some kind of chemical weapon or poison or something. But we don't stay with them for too long as it's back to Frank. He's arguing at home with the pizza guy, and he opens the door. And it's Aubrey, who is very drunk and tries to come on to him immediately. And he rebuffs her. And he turns her down. And instead of that, he consoles her and helps her through this moment that she's having. Because her and her husband are having a lot of problems. He's been gone for a while with his job. And he's been on her about how she's messed up this, and it's weighing on her. So she thanks him for being a comforting shoulder instead of doing what she wanted when she arrived. Whenever she leaves, it leaves me wondering what happened to the pizza. Did the pizza man bring the pizza? These are questions I needed to know. Questions I still don't have answers for. I'm going to have to power through and ignore it though, because it's the next day and Frank is bringing Jack to the doctor, unaware that the bad guys have already showed up and they're getting into place. And he's starting to question it a little bit, but he gets a phone call from Tarconi, who's arrived from France, and he's supposed to be on vacation. But Frank tells him, take a cab to my house because he has to go because he spots blood coming out of the one door. And he rushes into the room, and the fight starts. And while the two big guys look like they're going to be a problem, it is the woman Lola who's much bigger of a problem. She has got Glock 18s, I believe, is our automatic Uzi kind of pistols, and she is opening fire onto everything. She even shoots one of her own guys at one point because they had the unfortunate point of coming out of the wrong door at the wrong time. But Frank makes it out of there with Jack to his car, unaware that there's a device underneath of it, and he gets it out, and Lola has to call in to her boss, and it's on the plan B. And what plan B is that when Jack is taking Frank home, they're just about to get into the driveway when he gets a call, and a little laser dot appears on young Jack's head. And there's a guy with a rifle and armor-piercing rounds. So Frank has no choice but to let Lola in and peel off to the horror of the mom who's watching what's happening. And a police car chase later, Frank loses them, and Lola blows up a helicopter along the way. And back at the house, the FBI and the dad all think Frank has something to do with this. And meanwhile, Frank has been forced to go to a warehouse and they take the kid out of the car, and the main bad guy calls in the ransom and tells Frank to get back in the car and start driving. And Frank spots the bomb underneath of the car. And he gets it off by jumping a ramp and doing a flip and using a crane to dislodge the bomb underneath of it in the ensuing explosion to right his car in midair and land it safely. He starts making calls. He calls the house first to tell them where the boats are going, but they're not interested in that, and they go for Frank instead, who's already left the scene. Then he calls Tarconi, trying to warn him to get out of the house, but it's too late for Tarconi. He's picked up. Then he calls Audrey, who is the only one who believes that Frank has nothing to do with this. And Frank tells her this is a fake kidnapping. He saw them trying to inject Jack with something, and he does not think this is a real kidnapping. But he's going to do everything he can to get Jack back. The first thing Frank does after the phone call is he goes back to the doctor's office to get the surveillance footage so he has pictures to go off of. And he tries to get this syringe he knows that they dropped, but that ends up getting shot by one of the cops who are trying to take him down in a little mini fight in the doctor's office. But he grabs another syringe and fills it up with water, and he manages to escape the building. And he calls Tarconi, who's still at the U.S. Marshal's office, but he's befriended them, and he is in the kitchen cooking food with everyone, having a great laugh and a great time. But it does allow him to slip out for a moment and run the surveillance foot pictures through one of the computers to get him an address. And Frank makes a joke just in time for this guy to be trying to bail. And a foot chase later that starts as a foot chase, but the main guy jumps on a school bus. Frank jumps on a jet ski, chases down the bus, ramps it up onto the street, and then slides in close enough to jump aboard the school bus. They get to another little brawl, and that's when Frank injects him with the syringe. And this panics the guy, as one would, because he thinks it was the poison from the doctor's office. So he starts bailing, starts running down the block, and Frank is following him. But meanwhile, back at the FBI, the money had been dropped off, and Audrey starts suggesting that this might not be just a regular kidnapping when they get a call that they found Jack, and he's in the back of a random truck, and they get him out in a happy reunion. Back with Frank, though, he's followed him to a warehouse, and full of sick people. And we get another fight between a big dude this time, and it starts in like this garage area, warehouse area, onto a little boat, and gruesome death for the big guy. And Frank goes up and starts talking to the chemist and the guy. And we find out that Jack has been infected with a terrible viral disease kind of deal. It will infect anyone Jack breathes on and kill anyone that gets infected. And within 24 hours, though, the disease will become inert. Because it was manufactured that way. Quick, it happens fast, dies off. It's stopped from like a giant epidemic. It's just a controlled burst. And the real target was Jack's dad, who is part of, he's a government official kind of deal, working with the DEA and stuff like that. And the big bad guy, we find out later on, has been hired by the Colombian cartel to try to deal with the situation. And unfortunately, the chemist has 2 sets of antivirals that he chucks out the window, and Frank has to dive off and try to catch them. One of them breaks, though. And that one he gives to Jack. And he's explaining to Aubrey the situation. And Audrey's sick now. Jefferson's sick now. She tries to call Jefferson to stop him from going to this meeting, but he can't get a hold of her because she can't talk to her because there's a cell phone interference from the hallway he's in. So everyone in the room, the big conference he was having, is now sick too. And it's up to Frank to go find the big bad, who he has no information on, so he calls the only person he can, Tarconi, for some help. And together they find out that the guy's name is Gianni. And I hope I'm saying that right. There's a good chance I'm saying that wrong, but I'm going to run with it full steam ahead. And there's an address So he steals a cab with the cabbie, and still in the cab, and rushes over to the address, and a fight ensues. And it starts in the driveway and goes to the garage, and then there's a fire hose, and then we get the big fight between him and Lola, and then he chases down Gianni's before the Lola fight. In between the fire hose and the Lola fight, he discovers that Gianni injected all of the antivirus he had, or the vaccine he had, whatever you want to call it, into his own body. So he can't just shoot Gianni in the head and drag him off. He needs him alive to extract the serum. I used 3 different words there for something that only one of them is correct. Anyway, Lola fight. Then he chases down Gianni's helicopter in a Lamborghini, I believe it is. I'm not much of a car guy, but I believe that's a Lamborghini. He chases him down to an airport and jumps onto the airplane just before it can before it can fly off. And we get a brief little talking moment before the big fight ensues. The pilot gets shot. The plane goes down. He cripples Gianni so as to not kill him, but to take him away easier since they're going into the ocean. And he makes it in time to save everyone because the National Guard, or Coast Guard, picks him up. And we see him going to the hospital to visit, but when he sees that they're having a nice family moment, he just leaves the flowers on the tray and he walks off back to his car, which is a good thing because Torconi is waiting in the car to go back to France. He takes his friend to the airport. They say their goodbyes, and Frank returns to the car, and he gets a phone call from someone needing a transporter. And he says, "I'm listening," to set up that sequel. And that is the Transporter 2 to the review portion. Now, they always make Frank look like such a badass. And it is like 50% perfect framing. And 50% Jason Statham just looking like a badass. And throughout this entire movie, there's rarely a moment where he does not look like the coolest guy on the goddamn planet. And that's probably why 15-year-old Justin watched this movie so many times. Because he always looks like the man. And it's wonderful. Even now, it's like, oh, it's just so damn cool. Again, all of the fight sequences were a lot of fun to watch. Even the big group fights. Not to the extent of the first one, but still, back with this movie, they always find a way to help him in group fights and when he's in over his head to show off that he's actually a smart guy. Like when he's facing the big dude in the warehouse, he lures him into a smaller boat to deal with the height situation and keep him cramped and then into a tight little hallway so he can't utilize his size against Frank and it can just goes against speed versus cramped dude. Or when he's fighting groups, he's got a big metal pipe that wiggles a little bit too much, but I'll give it a pass. I'm not expecting him to be beating people with real metal pipes, but there are moments where you can actually just see it like wiggling. They always allow him something to make the big fight scenes a little bit more believable. And it is appreciated. I appreciate when movies do that. Lola. Let's talk about Lola. I can see a lot of people being not really liking Lola. That could be very controversial. Since I think the most amount of clothes that she wears in this movie is a long overcoat. When she's breaking into the doctor's office. That might be it. If you tell me that you don't like her character because they're sexualizing her, I couldn't exactly argue against that. But what I will say is, while her character and sexuality is ramped up to here, so is her badassness and psychotic. So I like the fact that she's not just this, but she's both. And I like that. I do find that to be a fun aspect whenever you have got this empowered woman who is overtly sexual, a badass, and will shoot you in the face. And she fires off that gun like it's wasting candy kind of deal. And she's incredibly fun to watch. I will say, the final fight between her and Frank needed to be much longer. And there should have been blood because they cut the R wanting to be PG-13. Fuck you, movie studios. I was like, that might be my only problem with Lola is that she didn't get a long enough fight scene with her and Frank. Like I said, she's more fun than anything else. But if you told me like you didn't like her because she's an over-sexualized object kind of deal, I couldn't really argue there either. Uh, Cons. You had way too many shots of the CGI plane that's like spinning out of control during their fights. Like you can just show the inside shaking and them losing their balance. That's more than enough to display what's going on. This story is batshit crazy. Like this guy's plot, Gianni, was hired by the Colombian cartel to infect Jack with a 24-hour disease, to infect his father, to infect all these DEA agent guys. And the transporter has to solve all of it. It is batshit crazy. So if you're trying to if you want an ultra serious film, this is not the movie for you. Because even like the first movie, it's kind of crazy, but it's still just based centered around human trafficking. He stumbles his way into a human trafficking ring, and he has to fight to save the people being trafficked. That's still pretty bare bones. This one is just bonkers. But as long as you go in just wanting a fun action movie, some beers and some friends and some pizza and chicken wings, you're going to have a great time. I had a great time still with Transporter 2. So let's give it a B+, which seems like more than a fair grade for a fun little 2005 action movie romp. And with that, have a good day, evening, night, afternoon, whatever in between. And as always, bye-bye.